All right. Thank you very much, Caroline, for a wonderful introduction. Just by way of introducing myself, I'm Jane Hylton, the not-so-formidable, and my background is 35 years in working in art museums, namely the Art Gallery of South Australia, and now a very close association with the National Gallery of Australia as well. I start today with acknowledging and respecting the traditional inhabitants of the land that we're on, that Carrick Hill sits on, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and the Adelaide Hills. Richard and I have been talking for some time about ways and means of invigorating, perhaps reinterpreting, focusing, examining, really starting to take Carrick Hill, I guess, to the next stage of its life. And we came up with the idea of a year-long program focusing on what is the exceptional history of Carrick Hill, the gardens, the artefacts, the grounds. We're calling it, as a working title, the Year of the Collections, and at this stage it's way too big to be manageable. But we're trying to, bring it down to a scale that can be done with the very, very small resources that we have here, which, as Caroline's outlined, is flexible and amazingly productive. As Caroline said, you'll see on your chairs a summary of what Carrick Hill has achieved since it received the Copland Foundation funding 12 months ago. And there are various tangible results which we can show you today, and some of which you've already just heard from Richard and Caroline as well. But then we've, I guess, arrived at a point where where to from now? The whole idea of our grant application was to, if you like, get our house in order. Now, it's a very well-ordered house anyway. But we needed to actually pay respect to the collections by getting them onto some kind of database which could move us forward in interpreting and invigorating and doing all those energising things that we wish to do. Carrick Hill, as any house museum, is a site steeped in histories. It has, of course, Indigenous histories. It has natural history, European history. It's a house. It's a collection of important paintings, sculptures and decorative arts, and its gardens and grounds and natural bushland. So it is an amazing site. It's extraordinary and has potential to be looked at in several different ways. And it's got some incredibly useful connections locally, one which I'll talk about in a minute from the Cedars where you've just been, and also through its collections it has major connections with other art museums within Australia, and particularly the Art Gallery of South Australia, with which it has a very good exchange relationship. We talked about our desired outcomes, and I guess they're the same as anyone who's working in a house museum or a museum anywhere, really. This desire to engage a new audience. There's an audience out there that we know is interested in museums and house museums, but it's how to actually enable a new audience to come in, to engage their interests, to broaden that audience, the user base, if you like, the internet users, the readers, the researchers, and that's something Caroline's touched on, and it's something that we will be developing into the future. We want to broaden the experience of that audience that's already familiar with Carrick Hill, and we do have our regulars who bring their visitors here. Particularly if you come to Adelaide, a really nice thing to do is to bring your visitor to Adelaide, to Carrick Hill, and walk in the gardens and walk through the house. We want to attract the visitors who come just to the garden into the house, and the visitors who come just to the house into the garden. We want to raise the national and international awareness of the quality of the Carrick Hill collections, which are incredibly significant. So discussion at this stage has gone on to how do we start to do that, how do we progress that, what sort of program structure do we fit something like that into? Do we go with the seasons? It's an obvious one here because of the gardens. Our South Australian summer is very hot and dry, December to February. The gardens are a bit crispy then, but the house is comfortable. Autumn is gorgeous in South Australia, March to May. In winter, we're only open from June to August because we're actually closed in a period in that for 6 weeks in that period for maintenance and so on. And then, of course, spring, this garden just bounces into life. So they're good starting points. They might not be the only starting points we use, but nevertheless. We've pulled together a draft discussion paper which we've really just put on paper everything that we've mentioned that could be a possible theme, a link, the indoor-outdoor way of getting people through the house, through the garden, suggested project types and some outcomes. It is vast at the moment. We'll be workshopping this in a week and a half's time in order to try and bring it down to something manageable that we can then actually start to cost, start to work out the resources for, start to work out exactly what the end product might be. And we think that very probably the outcome will be something that doesn't just last for a year, but it kicks off with a year and then moves into an ongoing series and sets of programs that Carrick Hill's public can enjoy. An obvious one in a house like this and many house museums around Australia would be, let's look at the 10 top works to see when you visit the house. And there are 10 top works that you should see while you're here. I hope you get a chance to wander around a lot more than that. But the 10 tops that I've decided on today, and this is a bit arbitrary because a few things actually are not here or might be in storage, but there's William Dobell's Study of a Boy on the Beach, which is out in the entry hall, and another one out in the entry hall, which is Arthur Streeton's Venice Bride of the Sea. Or there's Horace Treneri's, the great South Australian artist, lovely landscape there of Piccadilly Valley. There's Stanley Spencer, an unbelievably important British artist. The Haywoods collected his works in force, so we have one of the most significant private collections of his work here in this house, and from the artist's window Cookham, which is just up there, but there are several others in the house. Paul Gauguin's The Big Tree, which is sitting in the drawing room. A beautiful William de Morgan bowl also sitting in the drawing room. A Regency period red lacquered waterfall bookcase and cabinet also sitting in the drawing room. Russell Drysdale's Chinaman's Store, which Caroline mentioned, which is in the dining room. Matthew Smith's massive reclining nude, who also sits in the dining room and was the cause of much interesting conversation during Haywoods dinners, and Jacob Epstein's magnificent Mother and Child, which is actually sitting at the entry to the bookshop. If you don't get to any others, find those, and I'll repeat the list for you later if you need me to. Looking at those works can lead you to a trail, and that's the thing we have with historic houses, is the capacity to move from one thing to another and create these trails. And while they might drive us nuts in some ways, they can be incredibly inspiring for our public and for us working with those things. So this kind of interpretive trail within both the house and garden can lead to small displays of archival material. It can link with the history of the acquisitions, the reasons why the Haywoods might have bought something. It can create in-depth research projects, and it can increase our online presence. And it is a way to promote something outside the house physically. Hey folks, if you're walking around the gardens, you need to get into the house and see these amazing works which you will not see anywhere else in Australia. One of the great things, as I said, about a house museum is the links. So your top 10 can then lead you to one of Carrick Hill's major existing themes, which of course is the gardens and the grounds. Ursula Hayward, as you've been told, loved her gardens, and she had an extraordinary knowledge of gardens. She had a very specific vision for the gardens of Carrick Hill, and this makes a very interesting connection with hers and Hayward's patronage and relationship with the well-known British artists such as Spencer, and the reasons why many of the modernist works in this collection are actually still lifes, because they reflect this interest, as well as the fact that they are on a sort of domestic scale, if you like. The imagery of many of these paintings in the collection can connect directly with views from Carrick Hill's windows and the plants that grow in the garden. I again direct you towards Stanley Spencer's From the Artist's Window Cookham up at the top of the stairs there. Or his Flowers and Rooftops, his fabulous sunflower, which is just over there. Or in the dining room, his amazing blue iris, or his monkey puzzle tree. They're extraordinary, and they relate directly to the gardens here. So another indoor-outdoor, a very obvious one. And in doing so, we can remember that a historic house such as Carrick Hill is not one that exists in silos. It's not the gardens, then the house, then the grounds, then the history, then the collections. They all exist as one thing, and it's actually interpreting that in a manner that means that it enhances any visitor's relationship with this site. I'm just going to show you something which is, look, it's simple and simplistic possibly, but when you go and look at Stanley Spencer's from the artist's window, you'll see that the picture is looking through a window across an enamel bowl, which is sitting in the window sill, out into the roofs outside his studio. So you have to imagine, and I know you've got good imaginations, that this is a white enamel bowl that's all chipped around the edges, not a blue plastic one I just bought from Spendless, and that these are jonquils. And what he's done is he's just plonked those jonquils like that into the bowl and done this wonderful painting where you look across those jonquils out into the rooftops of Cookham. Why can't we at Carrick Hill, when the jonquils are flowering in spring, find ourselves a chipped enamel bowl and bring those flowers inside from that garden and recreate exactly what the artist was doing? Or why can't we do something like that in the garden that then draws people in to want to see that particular painting? We can then go somewhere else with that if we feel like it. We can take the jonquils out and we can actually then refer to the native grasses that have been growing on this site from time immemorial, which have never actually been planted here, they just happen to be growing. So you've got extraordinary native spear grasses, you've got amazing wallaby grasses, and they're growing out there when you wander around. They've been here for such a long time and never really been investigated. And there is the amazing grey box, which is really significant within South Australia's natural history and very significant to this site. And then, of course, there's the Indigenous history of this place, which sits so much earlier, of course, than the European history of this place, which starts in 1836. So you have all these conjoined histories which can create so much more interest with and for the visitor, and a much broader audience, therefore, when people realise the kind of breadth and depth that we can offer here. And I'm pleased to say that the conversation concerning Indigenous history is one that we have well and truly commenced. We can also examine aspects of the house's history, and you may be wondering why this rather astonishing-looking object is sitting here. In 1958, on the 1st of June, the Haywoods were away from Carrick Hill at their property on the Fleurieu Peninsula when a fire broke out in that room over there in the library. And it caused incredible damage to the books, to significant losses to their collection, serious, dreadful losses, one of the most famous of which is Joshua Smith by William Dobell, of course, which the Haywoods owned, furnishings and part of the stairwell and much of the panelling. So some of that was replaced. Some of those works were irreplaceable and some objects have actually been kept. This is a painting that obviously didn't survive very well. But we do have upstairs an enormous narrative Victorian dramatic sort of painting, huge thing, where you can actually still see the subject matter, but it is beyond repair. And there's a couple of quite burnt frames as well. So when we actually look at that story, then we move to what we can find within the collection that continues that story. I'm just going to make sure I'm not going to pull anything over here. And that is things like, oopsie, sorry, amazing burnt books. The Haywoods had an extensive modernist library of modernist literature and also an incredibly up-to-date library of art history and art literature. So there are amazing things like this that continue that story about the history of the house and the history of the Haywoods. And there's some material over here on display which you would like to have a look at afterwards. And then within these burnt books and bits and pieces, we found that there were these amazing lithographs by Andrei Yakovlev, who's an expatriate Russian artist, very popular during the late 1920s and 1930s, who lived in Paris, and who accompanied two expeditions run by Citron One was called the Black Crossing, thank you, and the other the Yellow Crossing through Asia and through Africa. And he produced these extraordinary limited edition portfolios of the lithographs. And so we have these absolutely beautiful images which are charred around the edges, once again telling the story. And then that leads us to knowing why on earth, in a collection that seems to be mainly about modern British painters and post-impressionist, it's really mainly a post-impressionist collection and a modern collection, while there would be something like an original by Yakovlev. In fact, there are three, and so I've put one here on the easel. And the fact that there was huge interest, huge contemporary interest in these journeys is one of the reasons why, because the Haywoods were really, really contemporary people, very much involved with contemporary life. Then something exciting happened today, just today. We've been searching for an original copy of the expedition books to see what they actually look like, because we don't know, because our copy's burnt. And while Richard was up in the Cedars, he was able to discover that the Hysons actually owned a copy of the Black Crossing, and we have that here for you to have a look at as well. So that's extraordinarily exciting for us, and also yet another connection in terms of collections and the way that we can all use each other's collections to great benefit. And then there's one other thing which, this is really bringing us back to the original funding from Copland, and that is the sort of tangible benefits that become so useful to researchers. That is one of the very tangible benefits of actually having everything on an electronic database. And I hold up for you Carrick Hill's file on Alexandre Yakovlev, which has all the letters, various articles, it has the catalogue worksheets and so on. And this is one of the next steps of moving on from having put all of those things, those 4,500 items, onto the database, of actually being able to have these research files available for scholars and available for us to use. I don't have anything more to say. You're probably quite relieved about that. Just to direct you to the various displays that we have around the house. Caroline's already mentioned the Edward Hayward stock breeding display that's been put together by Anna Jug, and upstairs Greta Lowndes' display that's part of Smarts Adelaide up there. But there's also a couple of displays we've put together just for today, especially for you, and I'm just going to move this little scenario up to underneath the painting so you can get a better pardon the pun, a better idea of what I'm talking about. And then we have a small display of rare books over here, and we've got this Yakovlev material, which is just a bouncing point, a starting point, if you like, of thinking what to do with those things. So thank you very much and enjoy.